Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to embark on the final session of these two triumphant days, and Heather Dean is going to speak to us about the evolving plans for the fifth and final workshop of the Diasporic Literary Archives Network. Over to you, Heather.
Good afternoon. So I know energy is dwindling, but hopefully we'll get you excited to come to Beinecke for the next meeting and to kind of keep the momentum of this meeting going. And I have to say that it's very inspiring and intimidating to be the final group hosting the Diasporic Literary Archives project, because I feel like the bar keeps getting raised higher and higher at each meeting. So keep that in mind as I'm going through our potential program. So what we've planned so far is that the meeting will take place over a day and a half. And the first session that we'd like to have would focus on collecting Born Digital Literary Archives. And I should back up and say that the focus of this meeting will be on the diaspora and the possibilities for digitization. And in thinking about digitization, we're also opening that up to Born Digital Archives, because this is really an area that you can't avoid these days if you're going to be collecting contemporary literary archives. Let's see. So the first session that we plan on having is on collecting, and this will be focusing really on the collection of Born Digital Literary Archives from the perspective of curators and dealers. And they'll be considering the legal and ethical issues involved in collecting Born Digital Literary Archives and the complexities involved, especially within the international literary marketplace. And our speakers will include Nancy Kuhl, who's the curator of the Yale Collection of American Literature, and she is specifically interested in poetry. And the reason we've asked her to speak is because in her work, she's become very aware of the necessity of thinking about Born Digital Archives, and she's played quite an advocacy role in thinking about collecting Born Digital Archives and requiring that the Beinecke consider hiring a Born Digital literary archivist. And so she was instrumental in the Beinecke within, I think, the last year and a half or so, actually hiring a dedicated staff member who specifically focuses on Born Digital Archives. And she recommended to us Steve Clay from Granary Books, and we wanted to have a dealer represented because they're really the middle person that the Beinecke often is working with when collecting literary archives. And lastly, we have Stephanie Strickland, who will be joining us, and she's an author based in New York City. And so we wanted to have these three perspectives of the repository, of the dealers, and then also of a creator. So an author who's actually working in the digital world, and her perspective of what it's like to maintain your own manuscripts and drafts of your writings when you're working in a computer world. The next session that we'll be having is preservation and access. And this will look at the realities that are involved. Okay, you've got the Born Digital Literary Archives, so then how do you preserve them and how do you make them accessible? And they will consider some of the practicalities, but really we want to look at the bigger picture and the bigger theoretical issues that are involved with diasporic literary archives and Born Digital Literary Archives. And our speakers will include Gabby Redwine, who is the digital archivist that we were fortunate enough to steal away from their Harry Ransom Center, and she joined us about a year and a half ago. And Bonnie Mack, she's an assistant professor from the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And the reason we wanted Bonnie to be included is because she's actually trained as a medievalist, and she studied diplomatics. And she did a postdoctorate at the University of British Columbia, where she was working with the Inter Pares project, which is looking at electronic records. And she really has an interesting perspective of looking at how you can apply old methodologies to new records and what that means for researchers and for users. And lastly, on this panel, we'll have Don Minerick. And he's now the digital archivist at New York University. This is a new position for him. He was actually formerly at the New York Public Library, and before that, he was at Yale University. So he brings the perspective of someone that is trained as an archivist, but has gone back to school and gotten more technical education. And he also has a unique perspective, having worked in different institutions, both public libraries and the university setting. And in the afternoon, we'll have a session on human rights and humanitarian efforts and activist author archives. So this session will look at the potential of born digital and digitized archives in the context of humanitarian efforts. And this will also expand on the idea of what is literary. And I think that each session we've had, or each of the meetings that we've had so far, we've pushed the boundaries on what counts as literary. And this will be a good example of a session that will do that. One speaker will be Trudy Heskamp Peterson. She's an independent archivist and consultant, and she was formerly the national archivist within the US, and she's been very involved with the ICA, she's been working with the ICA's Human Rights Working Group. She developed I think it's the Declaration of Access for ICA. So she's going to bring a wonderful perspective that will give a sense of the real power of archives for humanity. That doesn't sound like I'm overstating. And then she'll be joined by Catherine Hobbs, who's the literary archivist at Library and Archives Canada. And Catherine is involved with the International Council of Archives section for literary and art archives, and she's really been the one to first start to push for thinking about dissident authors. And this is a project that David has also been deeply involved with and has really worked to further. In the evening, we're going to try and instill some fun. Not that this won't be fun, but it might be a heady, full day. And in the evening, we wanted everyone to maybe let loose a little bit, and we're hoping to have a performance of electronic literature. So to bring in an artist who's really quite experimental and who's not just writing drafts, say, in Word, but who's actually creating works that are dynamic, that are interactive, that are not static in any way. And the author who we'd like to bring is named David Johnston, and he does very interesting work, and he also had the benefit of being based in Montreal, so we thought he'd be affordable to bring to New Haven, and it turns out he's since relocated to Hong Kong. But since we've become familiar with his work, we feel very dedicated that we'd like him and only him to come and create this evening for us. So we're working very hard to have him as the keynote that evening, and then that will be followed by a reception. And moving on to Friday. In the morning, we'd like to start with a session that looks at case studies, and this will provide an overview of 2 projects that demonstrate the use and the value of digitization. And specifically, we want to look at faculty-driven research initiatives, and they'll provide insight into the scholarly potential of digitization projects and research utilizing cutting-edge technology. And both of these projects use manuscripts from repositories around the world, so they demonstrate the possibilities for collaboration between different institutions. So the first speaker that we've invited is Neil Freistad, and he's a professor of English at the University of Maryland, and he's also the director of Myth. And he's involved with New York Public Library on the Shelley Godwin Archive, which I believe was launched on Halloween this past year. We also, this is not finalized yet, but we'd really like to have Meg Bellinger and Barbara Shaler, who are both at Yale, represent the digitally enabled scholarship with medieval manuscripts. And this is actually a project that consists of 4 separate projects that are looking at how you can use digital tools to further the study of medieval manuscripts. And lastly, we'd like to end with a session on digital scholarship and digital humanities. And this will consider scholarly work using born digital archives or digitized archives. And there'll be an emphasis on projects with an international component. And this session will look at digital humanities projects and the scholarly discourse that they foster. And we'll also expand on the traditional definition of archives in considering projects that use large data sets in their research. So often when I've heard digital humanities scholars speak, they might say, okay, you have to expand your notion of what counts as literary. And often I'm thinking in the back of my head, well, you also have to expand the notion of what counts as archive, because often what they're referring to as archive within digital humanities veers far from what traditional archivists would consider archival or an archive. Our speakers will include Jeffrey Schnapp, who's a professor of Romance languages and literature at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and he's also the director of MetaLab at Harvard University. We've also invited Rachel Foss to join us. She's a curator of modern literary manuscripts at the British Library, And lastly, we're, I think, about to extend an invitation, so this might be a little preemptive on my part. We'd like to invite Peter Leonard, who's Yale University's recently hired digital humanities librarian. And he's been doing a lot of work to look at the Vogue archive. And what I mean by that is he's been doing work with the digitized version of Vogue that's been done by ProQuest, and he's been mining these large data sets to look at some overall trends in Vogue magazine. So again, he's going not just beyond what we might think of typically as literary, but also going beyond what we might, in the profession, think of what counts as archival. And so that would be kind of the formal conclusion of the program. And then we plan in the afternoon of Friday to have an opportunity for the core members and the key partners of the Diasporic Literary Archives project to have an opportunity to meet and debrief and to think about the next steps for the project and where we'll be going from here. Most of the sessions will be taking place in Sterling Memorial Library, which is across the street from the Beinecke, and there's only 30 years difference in their architecture, and they seem like they're worlds away. And the reason we've chosen this other venue is because it's just going to be much more comfortable. It's easier to get to the bathrooms. There's more space. There's better IT infrastructure built in. There's better temperature controls. But the final meeting on Friday afternoon will take place in the Beinecke itself. And I'd also say that this is a really unique moment to visit the Beinecke because we'll actually be closing in 2015, in May 2015, in order to undertake a giant renovation. So this is an opportunity to see the Beinecke before undertaking this huge transformative project. So this isn't all set in stone, and I would really love to hear if you have any ideas of projects that you know about that you'd like to see involved in some way, or themes that you'd like us to ask the speakers to address. We're very much open to getting your input and your perspective on, especially given that this is the final meeting.
Can I just mention what is this working? Yeah. Can I just mention one thing, Heather? In the session, which I think is going to be a great session with Trudy Peterson and Catherine Hobbs, I'd like to make sure that as a network we address the limitations of digitization and respect the fact that, well, don't make assumptions that digitization is equally applicable in all countries in the world. So I think at the Beinecke's 50th anniversary celebrations, I suggested that there's probably about 195 countries in the world, and I wonder how many of those countries are ready yet to participate in all of the exciting possibilities that digitization offers. And for those countries that are not yet ready, what other types of media and alternatives and ways of interconnecting with sophisticated digital literary cultures are available. So I can't think, I'd like to talk to you about this outside the meeting, but I'd just like to put down this marker now that I think we should continue to aspire to be a network which puts out messages which are applicable in all the countries of the world, all the ICA member countries, for example. And I think we just need to bring that perspective about the limitations of digitization somewhere in the program, and it might fit best in the human rights area.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I've had colleagues liken digitization projects to buying a horse, and the fact that it's not just a matter of having the horse, but then the upkeep and all the responsibilities that you then have. So that's an excellent point. You can see also in our program that we've kept, this is really like the meat, and I was just talking to Helena about how we'd like to think of other ways that we can ensure that you have tours of the different facilities or cultural institutions that are at Yale. And a lot of it will come down to when people arrive and how much time is available for these kind of extras that we'd like to share with you.
I just say what I think somebody should say thank you very much for all the work that you've put in already to planning this. We're obviously all set to have a really good couple of days in the Beinecke. I just want to point at what's on the screen at the moment as well, and just be absolutely clear that that wrap-up session and look to the future will be open not only to the partner organisations, but also to the to the member organisations of the network, but also to the key partners, including UNESCO, obviously, but others who've been with us right the way through this 5-workshop programme.
Right, absolutely.
And we would very much want to involve those people in the deliberations about what we do in 2015, 2016, 2017 and 2018.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And if there aren't any more questions, should we close at that stage?
Sure.
And thank you for that presentation, Heather. That's great.